Hi everyone, very cool to see you here. Welcome to or welcome back to Peace Interview. Today, the Peace Project presents a conversation with Dr. Matt Hsu, an award-winning Taiwanese-Australian composer and musician who writes and performs music as Matt Hsu's Obscure Orchestra. Matt is a multi-instrumentalist who plays over 20 instruments and writes music that advocates for marginal communities and celebrates difference, inclusivity, and liminal spaces between cultures. This is reflected in his recent releases, a Taiwanese version of his song Welcome to the Neighborhood and Last Time That I Checked, a tribute to Nipsey Hussle. Join interviewer Emerson Lee Scott as he speaks with Matt about identity, the creative process, and the importance of diversity within music. To hear the full conversation, watch the full interview, which begins in 3, 2, 1.
Could you maybe, introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Matt Hsu. I have a music project called Matt Hsu's Obscure Orchestra, which was a sort of, how do I describe it? I play lots of instruments, and then I collect a lot of instruments from around the world, a lot of sort of orchestral instruments as well. So it's like orchestral instruments, world instruments, and like random objects, and I use them to make experimental music.
How did it start, I guess? When did you realize that you wanted to start Obscure Orchestra, and what's the mission?
Sure. So I found myself in a full-time job, and I was like, okay, cool, I've got a full-time job now. Is that what life is? Do I just continue doing this for like 70 more years and then I die? And that made me feel really, there was something missing or unresolved. And I'd always loved music. So yeah, music was the thing that I needed to reintegrate into my life to feel like, wow, this is living, sort of thing. So I joined a punk band called the Multi-Lovers, and I've been playing with them for about 10 years to this point. And through that experience, I got to know how joyfully social music can be. It's like this extremely communal experience. And I also got to play with my bandmates, like different instruments, accordions, double basses, like little banjolailies and strange instruments. And I guess that planted the seed of like, oh, like trying out these different instruments is fantastic. And then I kind of got prodded along by someone asking me like, oh, Matt, if you just created your own music, it would probably sound pretty nuts or pretty crazy because you've got such a strange brain or something. And so I kind of internalized that and took it as a sort of challenge to myself. And then I did start experimenting with like a single microphone, a laptop, and just whatever objects I could find or whatever instruments I collected up until that point. And the collecting just didn't stop, basically.
Oh, I was wondering about your like multi-instrumentalist journey, because I don't know, the website says 20 plus instruments, but I don't know.
Yeah.
How did that, like, what was the first instrument you started playing? And then how did you get into sort of picking up so many and learning them?
Well, my first instrument was trumpet when I was 10 years old, and then drum kit at 15. And I think between those two instruments, like a lot of important lessons about music were learned. Melody, like creating melody with a single note with trumpet, it's just gorgeous by itself. And then rhythm, like drum beats, rhythm, it's like a really important part of a lot of different cultural forms of music. And often the more sort of, I guess the thing that tethers a lot of cultures together is rhythm. Often there isn't like a scale or like modal system or anything like that. It begins with rhythm. Here's the thing, I'm a really bad trumpet player. Like if you ask any trumpet player in any sort of music scene and like, oh, how's Matt at trumpet? The answer will be, he's terrible. And I completely own that, because my goal in picking up instruments isn't to become an expert in it or like, the top tier con level symphonic performance type thing. It's just enough to get the knack of it, to get like, right, that's what this instrument is about. These are the basics, and this is, like when you're learning something and you get to a certain point and you like, yeah, it's gone really good, and then you hit that sort of wall or peak and you're like, okay, it's going to take a lot of hard work like 10 years of practice to get from here to there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just don't bother with that bit. I'm like, okay, cool. I got the knack. Let's learn something else.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes I find that playing an instrument that I don't know that well forces me to like almost be more creative with it. And so like
Yes.
I don't really know how to play guitar. I don't know how to play this instrument very well. So when I approach writing on guitar, it's such a different process to writing on an instrument that maybe you're like super familiar with.
Yeah, those limitations often beget new opportunities, or like it's that thing of writer's block. If you're faced with a blank page and it's like you could write anything you want, often people say, I don't know what to write. But if it's like, oh, you only have these 5 notes available to you, or the story has to start with the moon fell out of the sky, like that's like, okay, I can start with that. I can create something from there.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly what you're saying, like, what's an example here? It's like ukulele.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to play this thing, but I know that I've got 4 strings, and I don't know, I'll fiddle around until something sounds good. If I knew every single note and every single chord combination, the options would kind of be a bit too scary or something.
So I was wondering also about when you were younger, your like relationship with your identity, because I think Obscure Orchestra, from my perspective at least, is a lot about identity and about exploring identity. And you know, in your bio it says, you know, advocating for marginalized communities and things like that. So I was wondering, you know, what was your relationship like with your identity when you were younger, and how's that evolved, and how have you gotten to where you are now, I guess?
Yeah, interesting topic. And I wonder if we're going to have overlaps, having like, you know, both a bit of Asian heritage kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so, definitely.
Well, I was born in Brisbane, and I guess drive number 1 was to fit in. Like, I got to preschool, my parents had only spoken like Taiwanese, Chinese to me at that point, because that's what they speak at home. So I got to preschool like, oh, I better learn this language. And then primary school, high school was just kind of fitting in. And I guess that thing of when you're a youth, right? You just want to sort of be part of the crowd, but stand out a little. It's this simultaneous battle between, I want to fit in, but I want to sort of like individuate as well. And my way of fitting in, but also being my own person, was through indie music. I was like a metal vocalist in grade 10 to 12.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, we did like Rage Against the Machine covers and Deftones and stuff like that. So a lot of the identity stuff was like, all right, what's the widest thing I can do? Skateboard, listen to like indie, metal, punk music, shave my head, stop wearing shoes when I walk around like the city and stuff, just be as almost like crust punk as possible. And through that, I think I sort of like really diminished that Asian part of myself. I'd refuse to speak like Mandarin because, I don't know, up until that point, because of the racism I'd received growing up in the 90s, it was like, oh, I don't want to seem Asian, because when I seem Asian, I go back to where you came from and stuff like that. So I just tried to be as like white appearing as possible, which is hard when you look Asian, but you know, I have my voice, I have my clothes and musical taste. But that, you know, that's kind of just, I later realized, internalized racism. It's like, oh, I've just taken the racism around me and sort of like brought it into myself so that I can basically survive. It was my survival mechanism to not be hassled, I guess. And I suppose when I started the Obscure Orchestra project, I'd been in punk bands, I'd been in metal bands up until that point. And I'd sort of come to a point in my life where I was like, you know what, that was pretty stupid and pretty unfair to myself, to diminish that really important sort of cultural part of myself. So it wasn't a super deliberate thing to do, but as I started writing Obscure Orchestra pieces, that feeling of wanting to explore cultures and celebrate cultures rather than like diminish them became really important. And the way that manifested was like, in my mind, my trying to fit in music was playing, you know, guitar, rock, indie, punk stuff. And I just thought, okay, well, let's not try to do that for a little while and see what happens, which is where the sort of world orchestral folk kind of weird experimental sound came from.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. I think like you, I was pretty similar in terms of trying to be as white as I could be, because that's what I was surrounded by. So it was like, oh yeah, this is the thing to do. This is the way I fit in.
Yeah, that's right. And like, I think it's a good analogy to say there is nothing wrong with indie music, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to fit in. It's just indie music isn't the only music out there, and wanting to fit in isn't the only approach you have to do. There's like a whole world of music and a whole world of identities out there.
Definitely. So I think I also saw that you wrote a PhD, right, on indie folk?
I did. Yes, I did write about indie folk. Yeah, I was always fascinated by. Well, there's a Woodford Folk Festival thing that happens in Queensland, and it's just like lots of folk music from around the world, a lot of indie bands, but also a lot of like grassroots sort of let's get back to our roots and listen to simple music sort of thing. And I guess in the 2000s and 2010s, there were bands like Fleet Foxes. As it became more poppy, it became like Of Monsters and Men and Mumford and Sons, but they all sort of encapsulated this feeling of like, all right, let's get rid of the electric stuff and let's get back to the banjos and like stuff that people would have played 100 years ago and use those sort of sensibilities. So that kind of getting back to roots sensibility or aesthetic was really interesting to me, because we actually do live in the 21st century and we are surrounded by technology. So I was wondering, like, what is this whole thing of getting back to our roots whilst being surrounded by technology all about? Especially like, oh, let's dress up as if we're, I don't know, lumberjacks and grow out our beards, but also put those photos up on Instagram. Like there was this kind of like tension between technology and this ye oldie stuff. And yeah, like when it started, I think it came from a place of like purity. Well, that's a weird word to use, but like, let's not be afraid to get lo-fi, and let's not be afraid to create stuff with just the meager instruments and the meager technologies that we have around us. And it was almost democratizing in saying that like, you don't need to have access to a massive studio with lots of production equipment to make good music. All you need is like one instrument and your voice sort of thing. But the further along that sort of indie folk trend became, it did like become that like highly manufactured thing anyway, but it was just manufactured to sound folksy. And the other thing I explored in it was basically hipster culture, and like, why did so many men grow out their beards and stuff, and what were they trying to reclaim in terms of their masculinity? And a lot of it, yeah, we could talk for hours about this, because I did write, a whole book about it. But there's an example of Justin Timberlake. He got called out for kind of appropriating or using or employing sort of black man's sexuality in terms of like, Pharrell Williams, please produce all my music. Also, can you sing that part and I'll copy the inflection of your voice, basically using a black accent in all of his songs sort of thing. Okay. And then at a certain, I think, Grammy Awards, there was a person who sort of stood up and was like, okay, this kind of cultural appropriation stuff makes me feel weird. Our culture has been sort of mined for popularity for decades. And I think Justin Timberlake texted or like tweeted like, yeah, totally, I totally agree with that. And then the Twitter sphere was like, you're literally the person he's talking about. And so after that backlash, he went and made like a folksy country album. He like wore cowboy hats and yeah.
Wow.
as a sort of like, well, I'm totally not gonna rip off your like hip hop and R&B culture anymore. I'm gonna get so white that I'm gonna go to the country and like pretend to be a cowboy or something. Anyway, yeah, it was an interesting project to do, and I learned a lot about music, identity, and the idea of authenticity, and whether anything is ever properly authentic, or if it's just a word that we like to throw around, but it doesn't really exist.
Yeah, for sure. I think also with you speaking about indie folk, it kind of like resonated with like the bedroom pop scene at the moment, I think, which also started out as like, you can do this in your room with, a computer and a mic.
Yeah, I think TikTok is keeping it really real in a sense, because a lot of people are sort of creating basically comedy video series like with just their iPhones and simple iPhone app jump cuts. So it truly is lo-fi, and their use of music in it, I don't know, it has a way of keeping it really real, because once it feels fake, it's like, okay, that's super lame.
Yeah.
of thing.
Also, you mentioned authenticity, and I was actually wondering about what that means to you in your songwriting and how you feel about that word, sort of authenticity, when it comes to music and songwriting.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think the trick to that is to not think about it. I think any artist or any musician starting out is going to learn pieces that other people have played. And this sort of doubles as advice for people starting out in music. It's like, when you start out, you are going to play covers and you are going to learn other people's songs. That's the way we learn. And even if it's classical stuff on piano, you're learning Chopin and all those people. But at a certain point, when you feel like you have enough skill, or even if you don't have enough skill, it's important to try and use your own voice, to write your own music in a way that isn't just carbon copying other people. And I think the day I realized that was the day I started Obscure Orchestra, where everything prior to that point had just been, oh, this sounds a bit like the Cat Empire or like Madness or something like that. I think in terms of authenticity, it's just when you truly stop pretending to be someone else, or like combining your influences and just trying to sound like yourself, whatever that means to you.
Yeah. And I was also wondering about how you found the process of like making space for yourself within the industry. I think there's the difficulty in making space as someone from a marginalized community. Then also, I think you occupy a very niche space with Obscure Orchestra. So I guess there's two ways in which you had to enter the industry.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, this is a person of color. Also, they're making music that doesn't squarely fit into a clean category. I'm not sure if I have carved out. I've definitely carved out a very niche. That's for sure. Every now and then, like I don't feel like people really know me as like, oh, that's Matt Hsu's Obscure Orchestra. Maybe in my suburb in West End, but for the most part, it really surprises me when I get nominated for an award or someone asks for an interview or something like that, because, or maybe because it's COVID or something. There's not that sense of like, oh wow, there's a community of people that are saying hello to me and saying, I like your music. I will say that 4ZZZ, Brisbane's sort of like pirate radio, community radio station, has been really important for giving me like a little space to have my music heard. They've been incredible, and they, like, from the beginning, they've made it their mission to sort of unearth marginalized artists, people who you know definitely wouldn't get commercial radio play. They've been really, really helpful, and they're such nice people. I don't think Obscure Orchestra would quite be at the place it was today if it wasn't for them.
So what was it like winning? It was last year, right? The Queensland Music Awards, and that was for Make Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like?
It was insane. It was extremely unexpected. It was like a fever dream, to be honest. I had two Ashes. One Ash who I've worked with for like animation and like visual stuff, and they're this incredible artist. The other Ash who is this lo-fi bedroom like dream pop musician who largely just put stuff on SoundCloud and has never released anything, or hadn't up until that point. Her name is Abidalia, and then my wife Freya. So it was just this tight little group of four in this big space with like artists that I grew up listening to, like people that were on TV and stuff. And just thinking like, all right, well, I'm not gonna win, but it's so cool being here. And then they called my name and played the song in the background. And I think I put up a video of receiving the award and doing the speech. The shock is really obvious. Like I really, really, really didn't expect to win. And then I got up and just did an impression of like a 60-year-old middle-aged white man as the first moment of my speech. It hasn't changed anything, I think. I don't feel any more award-winning or anything. I just feel like, okay, I'm just still trying to make music that I find is interesting and put that out there when it's ready.
Because you got, highly commended recognition this year again as well, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Welcome to the Neighborhood. Yeah.
I really like that tune.
I love it too, yeah.
So actually, I wanted to speak a little bit about the creative process. So I guess actually we could start with Welcome to the Neighborhood. How did that song come about? There's quite a few collaborators in there, I think, isn't there? So
that's right. Yeah. I guess the very, very beginning was I was part of a theatre show in Queensland's oldest theatre called La Boîte. And it was a show that combined people of immigrant, refugee, First Nations backgrounds together, 7 of us. and we did a month-long performance where we talked about our experiences being people of color in Australia. And I formed really strong connections with these people, like found family sort of thing. And in the weeks after it had all finished, I started writing this piece of music. I think I was listening to a lot of 70s soul music at the time. So I was playing around with, I'd recently gotten this Nord keyboard.
Sick.
And it's the first electronic piece of equipment I've ever owned. Everything else has been sort of acoustic. So usually it's just like flutes, clarinets. I've got like this sort of basket of random stuff. So yeah, so this particular song started with the keyboard, Rhodes effects, just the chord progression that I was really liking. So the way I compose, I don't have a full image of what like the song sounds like when I begin. It's just layer by layer by layer. So I had the chords and I added a bit of flute. Flugelhorn came next, just for some like mellow horn sort of chords or harmonies. So yeah, when I'm doing it, I'm discovering it along the way. I'm kind of like, I guess if you imagine authors when they write stuff and they're like, okay, what happens next? I don't know. I guess some authors have a full plan, but when I imagine authors, they're kind of like, oh, then where did she go? Did she find the murderer, or did the murderer like escape around the corner? I'm that type of composer. It's like, yeah, what happens next? I don't know. Let's try some. So I finished writing the instrumentals of the song of Welcome to the Neighborhood, which wasn't called that at the time.
Did it have a name?
Didn't have a name. I think I just called it 90 BPM or something.
Classic.
And I kind of realized, oh, maybe I've been writing this song because I miss, being part of the ensemble of that La Boite theater show, which was called The Neighborhood. So I called up the cast and I'm writing this piece of music. Luckily, a whole bunch of them are like really, really good spoken word poets. And her name is Aurora, who's a singer, poet, model, actress who I've worked with before. So yeah, she provided the chorus vocals for it. Basically, it was a reunion of that show, but in one piece of music. And if you watch the music video, all those people that feature in it are the people that were in the show with me as well. So,
because you've mentioned that part of the music is celebrating inclusivity and advocating for marginal communities.
Yeah.
Was that their sort of collaboration that really brought that into the music, or was that something you were thinking about as you were writing as well?
The moment I decided to re-collaborate with them, it was like, yes, it is most definitely going to be about inclusion. But at the time, there was Black Lives was something that was like, I was really feeling a lot of, and also there was these refugees that were kept in a hotel, basically as a prison at Kangaroo Point in Brisbane. And there were a lot of protests that we were part of. So that a lot of those themes were in my mind. So I wrote this kind of like, I guess a sort of short 100-word, just sort of my thoughts, sent it to the collaborators and like, all right, these are my thoughts. These are some of the themes. We live in a neighborhood where like I'm comfortably watching Netflix in my living room whilst, people have been imprisoned for 7 years, just 2 suburbs away. And it's so strange that within this same basic neighborhood, all these different experiences are happening at the same time. That was the seed of the concept, I guess.
Yeah. Is that how it usually happens when you're writing? Do you think you kind of start with a bass sort of instrumental and then you begin to figure out, oh, I want this song to be about this?
Yes. Often it's like, all right, I just want to make interesting sounds. And then, oh, what does this make me feel like? Or what's the mood of this? Other times it's kind of like, I want to make a song about, it doesn't matter what I make and it doesn't matter who gets to listen to this. I just want to have fun making it. And that becomes the song Make Everything.
Which is kind of ironic, right, that it won the award, especially as it's about
super ironic, super funny. And I think maybe it's very poetic in a way that happened. I often find that when it's not forced like that, like when Michael Bay is making a Transformers movie, he's definitely forcing like, let's entertain as many quadrants of audiences as possible. Whereas when someone makes, I don't know, an art house film, they're not thinking like that. They're thinking, I really want to tell this story because I'm passionate about it. And that's the song, that's the movie that will win an award. So maybe it just comes down to passion and belief in it.
I was also wondering about, because you work with quite a lot of different disciplines within music, I guess, right? So I believe you've done some film work, or like at least sort of...
Yeah. It's a whole different approach. Composing is hard. Composing is really hard because when you write your own song, there are no rules that you're circumscribed by. But with this, it's like there are certain images, there's a certain story that people want to tell, and you really want to fit into that without losing your own sensibility, sort of thing. I did a project that I really, really loved last year for Brisbane Festival. It was basically an arcade of video games, except these video games were made to look like they were built in the 1920s. So only using that old school technology. Yeah, that was really fun because it was such a weird concept. I love it. And then sometimes I have to do like a commercial or something, and then it's just, I hate this job. Yeah.
This is a pretty broad question, but I was wondering your thoughts on how you think we encourage more young Asian creatives to do this sort of work, to get into these sorts of industries.
Yeah. I guess like you don't have to be any kind of person. You can be the exact kind of person you want to be, and you'll discover that along the way, and that will always change. I was in high school and I watched a lot of like Asian people play expert level violin in orchestras, and then they graduate, they go to uni to become like an actuary or a solicitor or an accountant and never touch a violin again. And it's kind of like, well, you were like almost master level pianist or violinist or whatever it was. It feels so wasteful to let that go. And I feel like, at least for some of these people, maybe they were super passionate about these instruments. And that's why they got so good at it, because they wanted to practice it because it gave them some sort of joy. I guess my advice would be to, you don't have to let that go. You don't have to like follow a certain script of what your life is meant to look like, sort of thing. Maybe this is more to do with my generation, and the next generation after me, this won't really be the case. But for a first generation immigrant like my parents, it's like, okay, we've sacrificed heaps. We're poor. I hope our kids do okay, sort of thing. And in our way of making sure they do okay is to sort of nudge them towards jobs with high job security and income, which is like, please become a dentist or please become a lawyer. Which to us is like, stop being annoying. That's like, I don't want to, do that boring job, and I don't care about money. But I think it's also important to know where they came from, and kind of like, it's not that vapid and one-dimensional. It's actually kind of this long story of like a journey across countries and starting from scratch again, sort of thing. I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't be mad at your parents if they want you to do a boring job, but also you don't really have to listen to them once you're your own person, basically, after school. So you choose your own adventure as well. Cool.
And I guess to finish off, what's next with Obscure Orchestra? Do you have any plans? And anything you want to plug?
I do have, I've got a couple of little things bubbling along the way. I'm actually creating a Taiwanese version of Welcome to the Neighborhood. And like, basically the concept is, this is my neighborhood. I live in Australia. That's going on. And I'd be really interested to sort of reconnect with Taiwan and find out like, oh, what's it like for my people back home? What's the shit going on over there, sort of thing. So I've hooked up with 2 rappers and a vocalist, and they're super incredible musicians. One's called Ilmo, who's like one of the original people who brought rap to Taiwan and popularized it back like 20 years ago. And another guy is this like young upstart, weirdo skater guy who's also like #1 on YouTube in Taiwan, sort of thing. His name's Chunyan, and he's just like, I just sense that he's got an insane brain full of these weird ideas, and it does come out in his lyrics. And a vocalist named Caitlin, who's sort of like producing it as well. She's like tethered all these people together and really helped me make this song a reality. Other than that, I've got my like 17-piece orchestra, and we're going to be playing a couple of little pop-up shows and filming them. So like, we've got a plan to film stuff on a train carriage, in the tiniest cafe we can find in the city, and kind of just all cram in a way that's COVID safe. as possible as we can.
Mm-hmm.
I want to write a song with 2 of the orchestra members who are in themselves like groundbreaking found object experimental avant-garde flute artists.
Cool.
Jody and Hannah. Yeah, I'm really lucky. Like this ensemble that I have, every single person in it, they're incredible artists in their own right. They have their own bands and projects and stuff going on, and they just like blessed me with their time and belief in the music, sort of thing. A couple of other things too, but yeah, I'm always working on a couple of little things at a time.
Composer is cool as his Obscure Orchestra. You can support Matt by following his Instagram at Obscure Orchestra and discover more about his works in his linktree at linktree/Obscure Orchestra. Thanks for watching and peace out.